Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and today we're going to go over our power rankings for Week 5. Basically, everything that's happened up to this point in the season, we're going to talk about a little bit of, and then also kind of outlooks for the next 4 weeks and where we think these teams could be going into the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're not doing this on a weekly basis. It's like once a month thing. So obviously, predicting things into reacting to what has transpired, there's a lot that has been completely different, turned up on its head, and you'll see that throughout the rankings, whether that's at the very start where we started with the bottom to the very top where there could be some surprises. So it's exciting. We'll get into it and we'll see how controversial we will be with. And again, it's a tapestry of just mixture of results, where they're heading,
Right.
injuries that have been suffered. Some, like I said, we'll get into all of it. But yeah, let's get right into it.
Well, on the first page, so as you can see on the screen now, there's a team down there at the bottom in the Miami Dolphins that's in 29th, and that has a lot to do with the fact that their quarterback's out. So starting at the top, though, New England Patriots 1-3 so far to this point, did beat the Bengals in Week 1, who we had much higher than we will in this overall, but we still lose. They still lose a spot, go down one spot from 31 to 32. Hard schedule coming up for the most part. It's going to be tough for them to,
Well,
win 2 games. I feel
I
like by
mean,
that
I was
point.
pleasantly surprised at the start of this season. Obviously, they upset. They were the biggest dog on Week 1, upset Cincinnati on the road. Then Week 2 took Seattle to overtime, almost won that game.
Mm-hmm.
But the last 2 weeks has kind of been more what we expected. So it wasn't competitive from the start with the Jets on primetime football.
Right.
And then last week, obviously, they tried to battle, but San Francisco, even despite injuries, are just the much better team. The one solace, at least for them, if you look at the next 4 weeks, there's not a single away game outside of going to London.
Right.
So even though there are teams, they're playing Miami without Tua. They're favored in that game again. Houston, obviously, there will probably be a home dog, but again, them and the Jets, you just never know when you're at home how much that can change the dynamic of things. And then obviously, Jacksonville is the only winless team right now. So there could be squeaking out a couple wins, but at the end of the day, as long as they stay with Jacoby Brissett, and even if they did go to Drake London, they're just so
Right.
inferior in a lot of important positions that it's just kind of hard to see them not have a top 3 pick come April.
Yeah, I think they're going to stay on this slide 29 through 32 the whole year, no matter really what happens, because I just don't see them winning more than 5 games, and that's probably where they, are going to sit at. Next up is Carolina Panthers. We know that Bryce Young got benched. Now people have asked for trade partners. Carolina's not actually going to go into talks for that, which I think I agree with. But looking at the team dynamic, it's much better with Andy Dalton still down here at 31st.
So they actually should have been, if they stayed with Bryce Young, they would have been 32 because they just looked god awful the first 2 weeks. They benched their quarterback that they started after just 18 games, or 19 rather, and have looked exponentially better. Obviously, they upset the Raiders on the road last week. Home loss to Cincinnati, but played them very tough. And Cincinnati was a desperate winner. Like they needed to win the game, and so they were up for it. And they looked much better. Again, they're similar to New England, and they're going to be on this slide pretty much the entire season.
Right.
Even if Andy Dalton does catch some kind of Joe Flacco-esque lightning in the bottle, I think it'll run out sooner than later just because they're just injury after injury. They lost Derrick Brown for the year. They just lost Shaq Thompson as well. So just kind of really thinning out in a lot of areas. And they just have there's not really a strength on the team. One solace has been Chuba Hubbard has been looking excellent the last 2 weeks. Jonathan Brooks doesn't sound like he'll be ready this week, but is ramping up. And so that'll be another dynamic offensively that'll maybe get them to, win a couple more upset games throughout the rest of the year. But again, they're just kind of going to be at the bottom for the most part.
Yep, it's going to hang out down here at the bottom. A team that we didn't have at the bottom, though, to start the year was the Cleveland Browns. They have not looked good in any way. The only game they won was against Jacksonville, in Jacksonville, 18-13, but they're averaging about 15 points a game. They cannot score. Deshaun Watson is kind of a shell of himself. I did see that Nick Chubb hopefully will be back, so that'll be a good feeling. Doesn't mean that it'll make any difference, though, with this team.
The problem with them is that they're probably not, from a talent perspective, a bottom 3 team.
Right.
But they have lost every single game that they were favored to win. this year so far. And the one game that they won, they were dogs.
Right.
And so obviously they're not winning the games that they're supposed to. It's just not clicking. They're not getting the turnovers that they were getting last year. They were the number one defense overall throughout the year. That's why they essentially made the playoffs and were there at the end, despite Deshaun going down. This year, it's just like it's not even the same team, and they're also dealing with the injuries. And Deshaun obviously is not himself anymore. So it's just a whole lot of not going right, and I just think it has a chance of spiraling out of control very soon.
Yeah,
look at those next 4.
That's what I was going to say.
They will be underdogs in every single one of those games. I actually think that they might win a game or even 2.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the expectation from a Vegas perspective is they will be 1-7. But even if they are 2-6, that is a very, very, opposite direction of where we thought that they were going following last year.
Yeah, exactly. But losing games to both the Giants and the Raiders in the last 2 weeks, I mean, those aren't.
Yeah, they're bad. Bad losses.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next team, Miami Dolphins. Tua is out. I've heard some rumors that he might be able to come back by week 8. I don't know that I'm comfortable playing him. I don't know what the comfortability and if you're willing to release him is. They lose 19 spots and fall down to here. They do play the 32nd team, the New England Patriots, coming up, and then they get a bye, which is always helpful, especially on the lists like this. So we might see them maybe climb back into the next slide, but I don't think they'll go any higher than that.
The problem is, I mean, this is solely a Tua, issue going down, but honestly, kind of shame on them for not being prepared with this, because Tua has an injury history. And so with all these successful backups that we saw last year when quarterbacks were just going down like flies, there were still teams like Cleveland and even Cincinnati that were still competitive despite their guys being lost for the year. Well, Miami elected to stay with Skylar Thompson, who really showed nothing when he did have that small sample size as a starter. And instead of, having a backup plan in place where Joe Flacco can come in, or Ryan Tannehill, who I thought would have been a great addition once he went down, they decided to stay more the same, and it's just an eyesore to watch. I couldn't even watch that Monday night game against the Titans. It was so bad, and there's playmakers everywhere, and you still can't even move the ball 5 yards down the field. It's just frustrating to watch. They're a dog against what is our 32nd ranked team.
Yes.
This week. Tua being back in week 8 will help, but until then, like, it just has gone. Everything has gone wrong. They're the largest negative differential right now, with a minus 58 point differential this year so far. Games aren't even close right now.
Yeah.
And so it's just not good in Miami.
They're averaging less than 120 passing yards without Tua in the last 3 games. Tyreek Hill is basically nothing right now. Jalen Waddle's basically nothing. So yeah, it's definitely hard to watch, and their defense just can't save them at this point. So next up, though, on the slide here, the New York Giants, they did move up 4 spots because we thought they were the worst team in football when this whole thing started. They're not necessarily good, but they're better than, I guess, the worst team in football at this point. They did play a close game against the Dallas Cowboys, who has actually also disappointed. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with them, it's just we expected them to be a bottom 2 team. They just look much more competitive over the last 3 weeks. Obviously, the first week, they were a home. It was kind of a pick 'em essentially against Minnesota, and they it wasn't close from the start. They were down a lot by halftime, and but the last 3 weeks, down to the wire, game losing field goal to Washington. Then they upset the Cleveland Browns on the road after being down 7-0 after 11 seconds, and then Dallas, who they hadn't beat Dak himself in 7-8 years, and they played him competitive, had a chance to win the game at the end. Just looked much better. Daniel Jones is actually, he's a butt of a lot of jokes, but right now 14th in the NFL in QBR. He's played 3 straight excellent games in my opinion. He's playing a lot better than a lot of vets that people would rank much higher than him in a quarterback hierarchy. They're just playing better than what their talent level is, which is always a good thing you see from teams that just struggle.
Right.
It's always a good thing to build on good building blocks. And so, obviously they're going to be a dog almost every week, but, they have the competitive fire to actually upset some more teams. And so maybe they're even better than we even anticipate going forward.
Yeah, I thought that it was good to see that they are so close. Another team, and the next team on the list in the Titans, they've had some really close games also, losing the first 2 weeks by 7 to Chicago and the Jets, who are both good teams we have really high on this list. Green Bay is also a team we're going to have in the top half of our rankings, losing to them, but then going to Miami and Mason Rudolph having to come in for Will Levis was such an interesting thing because Mason Rudolph had 85 yards and they scored 31 total points. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, especially with this bye that they have. Bye weeks are never really good early.
Yeah.
But they're one of the few teams of the week 5 byes that actually needed it just because what they were doing wasn't working.
Right.
And so obviously they, fell into a great matchup and were able to kind of handle Tyler Huntley and the Dolphins on the road. But we'll just kind of see coming out of the bye what's going to happen with them. Obviously, in division rival after that, and then back-to-back tough road games. They were a team that I just kind of saw struggling just because I didn't really see Will Levis taking that step to really kind of elevate them back into the 500 ballpark that they were, in, at, or above for 5, 6, 7 years. When Derrick Henry at least was on the team. And so Mason Rudolph, when you win the game and you're coming out and you're not losing games, because obviously with Chicago, they would be 2-2 if it weren't for Will Levis, constantly turn the ball over at the end. And he's been the butt of a lot of jokes based on his still shots and, his faces that he's making and positions and stuff after turning the ball over. He's just making very bad mistakes. And that's just not a good situation for a young quarterback that's on a young team that actually was built well around him this offseason, and it's still not working out. And so it's just like you're going forward with Mason Rudolph possibly. It's just not going to be getting much better from here.
Right. Tennessee Titans have the 31st ranked offensive line. I thought that was interesting. That kind of tells you another thing because I believe that these games are won in the trenches. 31st ranked offensive line is not going to do it for you. Jacksonville's up next. They have the 29th ranked offensive line. They have not looked good, but they have had some really close games, and they just haven't found a way to win. Losing to Miami by 3, losing to Cleveland by 5, and then losing to Houston by 4 this week after getting just absolutely destroyed by the Buffalo Bills 47-10.
Yeah, with Jacksonville, it'll be slightly controversial if it even matters because they're the lone winless team and they're all the way at 26. And it's like, how does that make sense? Well, the reason is because they're probably going to win 3 of their next 4 at minimum. They're favored against a 2-2 Colts team, which they will have Anthony Richardson. That won't change the Vegas odds in that game. I believe they win that game, and then they have back-to-back games in London. It's not just a go over there short week. We got to figure it out. Both games, both winnable. I bet they'll be favored in both games, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won both. And then you come back and you got a home game against Green Bay, so you don't have to go on the road essentially for a full month plus, other than going to England, but you will be there multiple weeks. It's a good situation to get back on track. I'm not going to predict that they win all 4 of these games, but 3-5 is legitimate possibility after this. And again, they've been a streaky team that just needs to find a balance. And right now, it's just nothing's working. And but this is the right situation to kind of resurrect the season if there is any kind of solace. Because if they do, in fact, lose at home to Indy, I don't expect Doug Peterson to be the coach on Monday. And then it's just going to get very, very wonky, weird, fast. But yeah, I think they're up to the challenge, and it's just a team that I expect to turn around very, very shortly.
Right, and they did play good teams. Like I said, Miami, Cleveland, Buffalo, Houston.
3 out of 4 on the road. It was a tough start to the season, and really the only game that we were shocked that they lost was a Cleveland game that was close, competitive, and other than that, they were dogs in every game. And the only kind of disappointing thing was just Buffalo being 0-2, going in there and just being as flat as they were. But you just saw Buffalo coming off of back-to-back blowout wins just get dominated on the road against Baltimore. So it's not always an end-all be-all thing. But yeah, they have not looked good. They need to be better. Obviously, they dropped 9 spots in our rankings from preseason to now. But I think they'll kind of be similar right back where we had them originally when we do this a month from now.
Yeah. Excuse me. Next up, the Arizona Cardinals Buffalo week 1 lost 6-point game, close game. Then they absolutely destroyed the Los Angeles Rams, who was littered with injuries. Go to Detroit, or had a home game versus Detroit, lose that game by 7, and then they just get plastered by Washington. And that's actually a good reason. That's a big reason why they're down to 25, because prior to that, you could have made a case that they could have been higher after playing Buffalo and Detroit so close.
Yeah, with them, I was very disappointed in how they played this past week against Washington. Obviously, they were one of our thumbnails and the highest game to prioritize or
Right.
tag. And Jaden Daniels rose up to the challenge. Cliff Kingsbury came out for revenge. And Arizona they've been very annoying to watch offensively from
Yes.
a play calling perspective. I mean, they have talent there. Line is very average, but they have the pieces to be putting up 24 plus points a game every week and be in the game. And their defense is playing much better than what their talent level is. I mean, they're the worst defense in the NFL, on a lot of areas, but they're still, getting turnovers and
Right.
not allowing everything. Obviously, the Washington game kind of snowballed later in the game, but really it was more so because Arizona couldn't move the ball after the first possession, and they scored 7 points in the final 3.7 quarters of the game because they scored early. But you look at the schedule and it's just like they're a touchdown dog to San Fran, they're going to be a big dog to Green Bay on the road. Even that, though they're home Monday night against the Chargers, that's
tough.
That's either a pick 'em but the Chargers, very good team that just kind of got banged up. They have a bye this week, so they'll be back and full strength hopefully by that point. So I don't even know if they'll be favored there. And then at Miami, that'll be the first game I believe that Tua will
that's
be
week
back.
8, yeah.
So very interesting way to go. But again, another team that we liked a lot to start the season that we thought could surprise. That it's just it could get south really, really fast if they're not careful.
Yeah, but I do believe that they can still win games against good teams and be annoying. And that's what we kind of expected. We kind of expected them to be 7-10 and annoying and beating teams that they probably shouldn't. Played, like I said, played Buffalo close, played Detroit close. I think they could play other teams close. But yeah, so next up is the Raiders. The Raiders are 2-2, and they beat Baltimore in week 2, which was a big upset. Gardner Minshew had 276 yards and was pretty electrifying, keeping them in that game, losing to the Chargers in week 1, and then losing to Carolina, which was the biggest loss by far, made the most difference on this rankings, but then beating Cleveland, which was good.
Yeah, it's a very uncomfortable team. It's a team that probably isn't deserving of the record that they have, but sometimes that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The problem is just the vibes are very weird there. Obviously, today comes out Davante Adams trade request because, and again, we kind of had vibes that might be happening, but Antonio Pierce is liking posts and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was weird.
Gardner Minshew, we'll see if he'll be starting this week. And there's just a lot of non-committalness around the franchise, and it's just not great to feel or hear. Obviously, looking forward, even though they're 2-2, they played Kansas City very well last year. They start out playing them at home, and Kansas City is absolutely decimated from the skill group position. Denver, they're a dog, but they've played Denver well before, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won that game. A home game against Pittsburgh, typically them as a franchise actually play up to Pittsburgh's level, and then the Rams, who are also banged up. So a lot of winnable situations in there, but even if they do, escape with 2 of these wins and they're 4-4 come November, it's just like I don't have a lot of faith in this team. It's just weird.
Well, as you said, they don't deserve to have 2 wins, probably. Losing to teams like Carolina, but then at the same time, like if they go 4-4, we're going to say the same thing. They don't deserve to be 4-4. And they're just squeaking out games at the right times of the year. So I think I agree with what you're saying is like, maybe the Raiders don't deserve it, but they are winning the games even in these weird circumstances that they have right now.
Yeah, it's just hard to place because there's actually a ton of 2-2 teams right now, and it's just like if we had to actually power rank just straight up every team that is 2-2, I just don't know if there's any team that's 2-2 that I would have confidence that they would take out on a neutral side unless they were at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of similar to the Colts, which Colts have just kind of been a mixed bag as well. Anthony Richardson leads the NFL in yards per attempt and is dead last by a mile in completion percentage, which is exactly how we've described him in the past. Is just cannon of an arm, but he doesn't do these simple things correctly enough.
Yeah.
And obviously he gets hurt again this week, comes back, gets hurt again the first play he's there. And, obviously it's a minor injury, but it's almost like it shouldn't be this redundant this early in your career. The mistakes, the injuries, all that stuff. And obviously Jonathan Taylor getting hurt again.
Yeah.
And even if both are minor, it's just like the team is going as y'all are going. The defense is absolutely decimated with injuries right now. They did have a very quality win against Pittsburgh, knocking them off for the first time this season. But it's just like I just don't really have faith in this team right now. If those are the kind of thing, the building blocks and what we have to kind of, I guess, have faith in going into the late parts of the season.
Well, I thought I told you a stat the other day. It was like Anthony Richardson has a better completion percentage on passes 50 plus yards down the field than he does from 30 and less, which is so weird. That's such a weird stat to be good at. Then, of course, I will credit the Pittsburgh win to Joe Flacco, not to Anthony Richardson. Exactly. Let's take it. That is not an Anthony Richardson win. That is a Joe Flacco win. Joe Flacco comes in, gunslinging it, just like Andy Dalton did, just like he did last year for Cleveland. And he's the one that won that game and pushed them over the top. Yeah, it's a very weird dynamic, like you said. And I think that as long as they try to push him as the franchise quarterback, they are going to have issues. And then up next is the Rams. Rams are just decimated, and they have so many injuries. They have 6 offensive linemen on IR. They have 8 IR spots. They have 12 guys that are on IR. They literally cannot put them on IR. So that's the biggest problem with them. But
the good solace and news is that they're another team that for a whole month they don't got to travel. And at least on this one, the other 2 examples that we mentioned previously, they still got to go to London. So it's a neutral site game, but you still got to travel. They've got home game, bye, home game on a short week. So I don't know at what point Cooper Kupp will be back, but they need him. I don't expect Puka Nacua to be back within the next few weeks, maybe for like a Minnesota, but I don't know why you would rush him back on a short week. But really, these next 3 games are very, very winnable. They're actually a very big home dog against Green Bay right now, which is kind of one of my favorite early kind of thoughts or spread bets of the week. But yeah, like 1-3, even if they drop to 1-4, there's a good solace in where they're at, where they can go. And obviously there's a lot of teams that we thought when we were like the wild card was going to come down to Chicago, Dallas, Green Bay, and the Rams. All of them are underperforming right now.
Right, exactly.
So it's like, it's not like they're falling behind like other teams that we've ranked below them. They're actually right in the thick of things despite being 1-3 and struggling. They're just kind of weathering the storm right now. And there's a way that they can get back and just kind of right this ship.
That bye week in week 6 is huge for them. That is one of the biggest, like we talk about, like you said earlier with Tennessee, like there's certain teams that need the bye weeks early in the year. And the Rams are one of those teams. They put, like I said, multiple players on IR. They will get them back in week 7. That'll be the time where they get all their players back if they are capable of playing. So that'll be a big week for them. Next up, sorry, go ahead.
No, just kind of even further of an outlook. 6 of their next 9 games are at home, and not including that bye. And then the 3 road teams: Seattle, New England, and New Orleans. Very winnable games,
right?
And so I'm not saying they're going to go on this long win streak, but there's a lot of quality possible wins on that board that they could be right at 7-5 all of a sudden, right after 12 weeks. And it's just like, how did they even get to this point? Right. How decimated they were.
I think the next team is super interesting at 21. More so than anything, you look at the Denver Broncos. They started out the year losing to Seattle. Seattle has really played well, so that helped their resume. Then they lose to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh goes 3-1. That helps their resume. They lose by 6 and 7 respectively. Then they go into Tampa Bay and beat Tampa Bay 26-7. And then they go to the New York Jets and beat them 10-9 this last week. I understand why we're hesitant on putting Denver in the top, 20, but they have played, and their resume currently shows like, wow, that's actually very impressive.
I've been so impressed with their resume winning the last 2 games. Yes. That they were, touchdown dog to Tampa and a touchdown dog to the Jets. And even though it was bad weather and it could be fluky, it doesn't matter. They were a much inferior team on both regards. And they, in Tampa's at least perspective, who has 3 great quality wins, and they'll be way further up these rankings.
Right.
When we'll talk about them later. But they decimated them on the road.
Held them to 7 points.
Yeah, and then the Jets, obviously much more talented in a lot of areas. And despite Bo Nix having -7 passing yards at halftime and being a joke, they're finding ways to win when they're playing their worst, which is a great sign for a young team. It sucks that they lost their middle linebacker, Alex Singleton, I believe is his name, leading tackler the last 2 years. That's a big blow, but their defense is playing lights out right now. The offense, it's kind of hard to have much confidence in, but I mean, they're just playing. They're basically very similar to the Raiders, but they're playing with much better vibes right now.
Right.
And so that's kind of why, there's a little bit of a gap between the two. They actually play each other this week, so that'll be a very interesting game to be on the lookout for. But yeah, like talent-wise, probably still a bottom 7 team, but they're outperforming their expectation right now, which is exciting to see.
And they also have the opportunity to play, at home against the Raiders. If you could kind of say that's a win, right? Then they at home against the Chargers, going to New Orleans, and then back at home versus Carolina at the end of this 4 weeks.
We be 5-3, and
we could see them in the top say 18, 19, in the top 20 pretty easily if they do just handle their business, in my opinion. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing, just talking about, they were one of our darlings coming out of preseason, and now they're outperforming. Sean Payton's got them figured out a little bit. Their defense is playing really well, and that's been really, really good for them. The next team is a team we didn't really think we'd see down here this far. It's the Dallas Cowboys, and that is your team, Cam, so I'll let you take this one.
They just don't look good at all. There's not really a lot to be happy about. And then obviously the win that they had against the Giants was probably the worst win that I could think of so far this season. And obviously, there's a dub and an L in a win column or a loss column, and that's just kind of what matters at the end of the day. But the Giants, you should have been mollywhopped them by 20 plus points. You could not get off the field to save your life. And on top of that, the win that you had, that was coming off 2 back-to-back games where you down 3+ scores at home to each team. And then obviously you try to make it close with Baltimore. That's kind of Dak's MO, is that, you box score watch. Oh, he had a solid game. No, he played when they were playing soft coverage and giving cushions and stuff like that. Made it interesting, but it never felt like, Dak is going to lead this comeback. Not once when I was watching that game did I have faith that was going to happen. And then on top of that, like I go back to the Giants game, they lose DeMarcus Lawrence. He's on IR, out at least a month, but probably even a month and a half, 2 months. And then Micah Parsons, high ankle sprain. He's probably not going to play this week. I don't think he'll be on IR, but I don't expect him to be back before the bye week. And it's going to get ugly really fast because they're at Pittsburgh on Sunday Night Football. They're dogs in that game. Wouldn't be shocked if they won because Pittsburgh's kind of outperformed expectation a little bit. They're kind of very even keel in terms of a roster perspective, and Pittsburgh's also dealing with injuries, more specifically on the offensive line. Detroit, they're going to be a home dog and could start the year 0-3 at home. And then at San Francisco, it's not going to be close. And I'm just not looking forward to even watching or even talking about that game because we will be for a showdown slate. But
right, of course.
At best, they're going to be 3-4 after that stretch. And then it's just going to get harder from there because they go on the road to Atlanta, who is starting to kind of figure things out, home against Philly and Houston, and then at Washington, who is right now leading the division, as my, big call out I said. So I don't see any pencil in or just put in ink wins anywhere on that schedule over the next 7 weeks. And that's just really tough when, you start out 2-2 and you should be 3-1 at minimum. Based on these games, and it's just tough to watch. Probably a little too negative to them, but it's not like when we do this a month from now they're going to be much better than this. I don't really anticipate them winning 2 of those 3 games that are on listed on those next 4. It's just not great to be a Cowboys fan right now.
So if I'm doing some stat digging, the Cowboys normally they might have a bad defense, whatever. Like right now they're bottom 10 defense right now for total yards, but normally they have turnovers, and that kind of adjusts for everything. You know, they have guys that create turnovers. Well, right now they have 4 turnovers through 4 games. That is just not enough. And I think that that's a really important stat that we normally see Dallas kind of be really good at, interception wise, Trayvon Diggs and then Jerron Bland last year and all those things. Well, that is not happening right now. So Dallas has to figure that out. That's partly because they don't have their DC that they had last year, and Mike Zimmer's there instead of Dan Quinn. Then going to Cincinnati, they're one of our biggest fallers, going from 7 to 19, minus 12 spots. They are almost ended up being one of the only other 0-4 team. They got a easy game by our standards against Carolina, but they still made that game look way too close for my liking. So
yeah, with them, they finally kind of got the monkey off their back and just kind of finally got one in the win column, which was huge. But obviously one of the bigger upsets of the year so far was the Patriots beating them when they were shorthanded.
Right.
And then week 2, very admirable loss at the very last second for a game-losing field goal as time expires against the Chiefs. What are you going to do? Like, that's not really one to poo-poo about. And then with Washington, it was a little frustrating because that game they definitely should have won and taken care of. But Washington also played up. They played well. And especially what they did on the road against Arizona, that's not really a bad loss in any regard. They just started out the season slow. They have done that every year of Joe Burrow's career, but this is kind of where it starts to get interesting because a bunch of very winnable games starting to kind of come into fruition. This week against Baltimore is going to be a massive game because Baltimore and Cincinnati, since it's been Lamar versus Joe Burrow, they basically kind of split it down the middle. Baltimore plays them tough just like Cincinnati does, and for not only bragging rights but just to keep this ship right. Obviously, with losing to already having 2 losses, being 0-2 in the AFC so far, you don't want to drop to 0-3. But going to the Giants the following week and then at Cleveland, which Cleveland has actually played them well as well in recent years. I just think that they can turn it around. Joe Burrow is quietly 6th in QBR so far to start the year. So despite his bad first game, he's been pretty lights out since. So that's a good kind of indication that he's kind of getting his legs back under him and, back to where we thought he would be and coming off his season-ending injury last year. So it's kind of interesting. But moving on, one of the teams that we were very wrong on made us very, very nervous.
I'm less nervous now.
Yeah, less nervous now, but New Orleans obviously were the hottest team through 2 weeks, averaging 45 a game and just killing it like they were, and they've kind of came back to earth in a very quality way. It's not like there's been bad losses since, and it's just like, oh no, this is who they actually are. They lost as time expired against Atlanta and then Philly with a minute left, go ahead touchdown to take the lead. So
yeah,
very well could be 4-0 and they'd be much higher on these rankings, but they lost 2 games that are really going to matter later in the year. If they would have started out 4-0, not only as a record, but also within the NFC, that would have been a huge tiebreaker, especially because they had one of the easier schedules coming into the season.
Yeah.
But now you kind of do that up and you're 2-2, kind of what we thought you'd be regardless. Then you're on the road against Kansas City. Tampa Bay is hot. Denver's playing well. Chargers on the road. So I'm not saying that you're going to just kind of plummet now, but you really kind of got to keep it up and make sure that these 2 losses don't really affect you. I don't think that they will immediately, but they have a possibility of just kind of falling right back where we thought they would be, despite kind of giving us a little bit of heart palpitation to start the year.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I was a little nervous. I was like, okay, they scored 91 points in 2 games. I don't know what I'm doing. Obviously, as a guy that talks to you all about what teams are supposed to be, Alvin Kamara's looked so good. He's been just absolutely amazing, and they don't want to not give him 30 touches a game. So that makes it a little bit easier on him, too. Even this team is just going to have a really tough road for the next few games. And that's why I think after this week, when we get to our next power rankings, I think they will be lower than 17 in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Next up,
next team that just beat them. And otherwise they would have been flipped and then a little bit more of a gap had Younghoe Koo not hit that field goal, which he is killing it. Kickers in general are killing it, but he is as well. Hit a bunch of long field goals yesterday or 2 days ago. But Atlanta, just very quality start to the season. I know they're 2-2. but the 2 games that mattered were NFC games. They won them both. Had a 1% chance to beat Philly at the time of when they had the ball and found a way to win those games. When you do, those are huge confidence builders. And then New Orleans, who, started out hot and you took care of it and you won at home, didn't cover like we hoped you would. Otherwise, you would have been 5-0 last week on your spread picks.
Yep. -2.5. It was and it was a 2-point game.
But I mean, losing a close game to Pittsburgh where you didn't allow a touchdown,
yeah,
not an end of the deal. And then Kansas City almost won that game. There was a little bit of controversy, but no one's going to hurt you for losing a close one to Kansas City. And then kind of moving forward now, you got 2 games against Tampa in the next 4 weeks, especially one on a short week, Thursday Night Football. And we'll be going over that showdown slate soon if y'all want to check that out. And then a home game against Seattle at Carolina. Very reasonable to see 3 wins out of that.
Right,
and
exactly.
All of a sudden, you're right, kind of back where we thought you would be and kind of running away with this division by default. But, I mean, Tampa has a lot to do with that. If
Tampa's good.
Yeah, Tampa's good. We're kind of split on how this game will go this week. But at the end of the day, I think we probably would just anticipate both of them splitting. But if either of those teams can find a way to win both of those games, that's going to be huge for Atlanta, especially if you do win 3 of these next 4 and then you start 5-1 in the conference. That's a very, very good way to be at through halfway point in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the next screen here, we got the New York Jets, 2-2 at this point, lost 5 spots. They do go to London against Minnesota in the first game in this week, and then they play 2 primetime games.
3.
Exactly. London would be primetime. Going to Monday Night Football against Buffalo, and then Pittsburgh on Sunday Night Football. Lots of teams, lots of wins in these first 3 weeks of teams that they're playing, and then they get New England, who is 1-3. But yeah, I think that the Jets are slightly underperforming, to say the least.
Yeah, with the Jets, we knew that basically to a T how they were going to start the year. They were going to struggle against San Fran, and that was before we knew about the injuries. But we penciled in a loss, and then the next 3 you had 3 back quarterbacks or rookie quarterbacks that you were going to deal, and you would get 3 wins, and then all of a sudden you're 3-1 playing, a Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy at the time, and then you got a home game against Buffalo, and then your season really starts. Well, you drop a home game to Denver. That was a pretty bad loss. Did not look good, and so now it's just kind of like, I don't really know what direction they're going, but they're going to be on TV a lot. They're going to be in the headlines a lot. In this game split, they'll probably, I would say, split, maybe win 3. But 5-3 Jets, I don't know how I would judge that or kind of compare that to the other teams, because, I mean, they're kind of right where we initially started the year, and then we bumped them up because other teams were just kind of falling back.
Right.
Kind of right smack dab in the middle, and I just don't have a lot of confidence in them just kind of really vaulting towards the top and from contender status like they should be based on their roster.
Well, I will say it's going to be hard for me to want to say that the Minnesota Vikings are going to be 5-0 after this week, just because that's something that I don't necessarily. I think sooner or later they're going to lose, but they have looked really good. They are playing in London, which will be a weird situation, of course, for any team to kind of combat. But yeah, I think that the Jets are good. I think that we might see them higher on this list, but if they do go and lose 3 games in a row, we will have to put them lower, obviously. Next team up is Green Bay. Green Bay lost 6 spots on our list, and Jordan Love being out, I thought was actually going to be the reason why we were going to bring them down. But Jordan Love lost both of his games that he started in. Malik Willis is the one both. Yeah. So it's really not. It's a really weird dynamic that's going on in Green Bay. But also not only that, they just. When Jordan Love is on the field, he's going to throw for 300+ yards, it feels like, and then they just can't stop anybody.
So yeah, it's interesting with the Packers is that they're kind of the opposite of Atlanta, where Atlanta, they're 2-2, but they won both NFC games, important tiebreaker games, and then they lost to 2 AFC teams.
Right.
Well, Packers, even though that they, were able to go 2-0 in Jordan Love's absence, both AFC teams don't mean a thing from a tiebreaker perspective. And then they lost to Philly, and then they lost a home game to Minnesota. They're not bad losses because they were close games, but they're 0-2 in the NFC. They're at the Rams. I think that's a very interesting spot where I don't know if they should be favored as high as they are. And I wouldn't be surprised if they drop that game. But then there's games where you should be winning against
Mhm.
Arizona and a home game against Houston and at Jacksonville, but I don't know if I have confidence enough to just bet that and say, oh, they're just going to go out of the stretch. They're 4-0, 6-2 after October. Very interesting. I think they're kind of right where we thought they were as the third. Well, now that Minnesota's 4-0, maybe they're fighting to be the third best team
Right.
in the division. But them in Chicago, who's right beneath them, they're going to be right neck and neck the entire year, and so it'll be very interesting when they do meet finally after their bye in Week 11, and then the final week of the season. I feel like it's really going to come down to just those two teams, and for the last spot
Yeah.
in the playoffs, and so they're going to be right in the middle of the league from the 12 to 18 spot
Mhm.
every time we do a power ranking, and good team. I think it's just situationally if kind of the pieces line up where they may.
Yeah, and then talking about Chicago, they go 2-2 in the first four. They do win their only NFC game, which is big, like we talked about, against the Rams. So they then lose to three. They lose to two teams and win one game against the AFC South. And next game up is Carolina at home, and then Jacksonville in London. So I think the Carolina game, I'm going to say that their defense is just too good and they only need to score 17 points and feel comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of right where we thought it
Mhm.
would be. I mean, obviously Caleb hasn't performed as well as we thought he would. I think a little bit of that has to do with Keenan Allen being injured to start the year, and then Rome kind of being banged up, and offensive line is just not playing well. Also, offensive coordinator, I think, is
That's what
just
I was going to
not been
say.
playing
That's my
or
biggest
not
problem.
been meshing at all, and
Mhm.
he's not the guy. And that was kind of the one nervous thing that I had with him. Coming to Chicago is that even though from an on paper standpoint everything's aligning like it should be for a young quarterback, the coach isn't there, and the coach is really the
Mhm.
most important vital piece. And so you can have these top 10 pick receiver and a multi-time Pro Bowl receiver and this other 1,000-yard receiver that you bring in, and this still won't mean anything if plays aren't being called right. I mean,
Right.
that's just kind of how we view it. And like I said, they move one spot down, but they're kind of right where we thought they'd be. The next three winnable games probably go.
4 winnable games, my opinion.
You think they're going to win their bye week?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
you're
just
good.
looking at the games. My
Oh,
bad.
you're
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, yeah.
But
Sorry.
even
My
going
bad.
further down their schedule, like even after that, it's at Arizona, like
Yeah.
we were looking at, home
Yeah.
against New England, home against Green Bay, then home against Minnesota. It's just like a lot of possible dubs, and even though they're not performing well offensively yet, that's just kind of the thing is if you're just keeping even keel as you're struggling, you'll find your stride eventually. That's kind of what Green Bay did with last year, which was they were kind of 500 ball through the first half of the season, and then just started really getting their legs under them and going on a run, and then all of a sudden they were on the road up in the fourth quarter against the 49ers in the divisional round. So that's kind of a similar boat of where Chicago's at. I just don't know offensively their coach if that they can really put those things together
Mhm.
and perform like we know that they can from a roster perspective.
Right. And then the Los Angeles Chargers moving up 7 spots. They're going into their bye week. So they can't lose this week. They did beat the Raiders and the Carolina Panthers, which are two of our lower teams, and then they played Pittsburgh and Kansas City, both losses, but holding Kansas City and Pittsburgh to under 20 or under points is always good. Coming up though, they will have at Denver, at Arizona, and then home versus New Orleans, all very winnable games. It's a good team.
Yeah, so again, similar boat was like losing to Pittsburgh on the road wasn't a bad look.
Right.
Also, they just lost both tackles, Joey Bosa and Justin Herbert, all in that game. So
Yeah.
even though they did lose and they were down at the time in which they lost those guys, it's not like if they played Pittsburgh again, no chance.
Right.
And then with all those guys basically out, except for a banged up Justin Herbert, they still played Kansas City very well. We thought that would be a possible route. And with Justin Herbert playing, they were right there towards the end. And it was just an ugly loss in terms of like a low scoring game. But their bye, you never want to early bye, but this is kind of the right time for them to get healthy because all those guys that they did lose, I don't believe any of them landed on IR. On top of that, Derwin James missed this past game
Yes.
due to, a weird situation, kind of like repeat offender from personal fouls. But yeah, I mean, they're a very good team. They're going to be in the playoffs. Jim Harbaugh has fit seamlessly
Yep.
with the culture in that
Perfect.
regard. And, shout out to J.K. Dobbins for doing as well as he has. LaGrange guy, Central Texas.
I was
He's been
nervous.
killing it.
He is one of our stands that we were wrong on, and I'm happy that I was wrong about him. If I had to pick a guy like that, I was like excited to play well.
Right.
A guy that's been on injury so many times and stuff like that.
And he wasn't necessarily a 0%er for us.
No.
0%er was Gus Edwards, and
that
we
worked out.
started kind of being like, okay, JK, you're still getting the 1 rep, so we'll get some sprinkles and stuff. But Kamani, obviously, he was a big stand we had, and he has not played a game this year so far. Which, even if he did and he started to, I think he can still go in and become a waiver wire priority. But that's a fantasy video that we'll talk about another day.
Absolutely.
But yeah, jump into the top 12. Seattle Seahawks 3-1, dropping a high scoring affair against Detroit. I mean, maybe this is a little too low for somebody that was 3-0 going into this week, but it's just kind of really an ugly schedule.
Yeah,
it's just like, how do you really make anything of beating Bo Nix and then Jacoby Brissett and then obviously
Skylar Thompson?
Yeah. Like it's one of those, like, you won the games you're supposed to, but I can't really take away anything from it. And then obviously their first game that they play a legitimate offense and legitimate team, they get 42 dropped on them. And Geno Smith played admirably. He's played very, very well.
He's the leading passing yard leader for the year so far, which is good.
Yeah, and then they're a 6-point favorite against the Giants, and they should beat the Giants and go 4-1. But then after that, you got San Fran, Atlanta, Buffalo, and the Rams, who are all playoff teams. And I don't know if they'll be favored on any one of those games.
Right.
And then it's like, if you drop 3 of those 4, then you're kind of right where we thought you were, and you just have maybe a win or 2 extra on paper. But I mean, that was just the team that we thought would be kind of fighting with Arizona as being the scrappy 7-win team. They've played well. There's no denying that. But I think they're just kind of a little higher than what their actual team.
They're gonna be 4-1, and people are gonna be screaming from the fences, and that'll be okay because then they're gonna have to play real teams,
and that's just kind of one of those things. Like, it's a power ranking. Like, this is how you've played so far, and a little bit of where you're going, kind of thing, and your present standing. But I don't really have it. They haven't really showed anything that's just like 4 weeks from now they're going to be 6-2,
right?
Or 7-1, and they're going to be right in the top 5 and be in contender status
Mm-hmm.
in the NFC. I just don't see that. They could prove us wrong, though, just like Pittsburgh, who has started out hot, 3-0, almost 4-0 against the Colts. Just a really good team that they're favored again this week. And then at the Raiders, which, even though they've struggled against the Raiders in the past from a team versus team perspective, they should be favored or, win that game. And then you got home games against New York Football, and you should be favored again. So obviously their schedule gets much, much, much harder in the back half of the year. But we acknowledge that they needed to get their wins now, and they're actually doing that, which is a pleasant thing. And shout out Justin Fields earning that QB1 job. Don't you dare even consider Russell Wilson coming in unless there is an injury, knock on wood.
Right, of course.
He's earned the right to have this job, and even in his one loss, he had his best game of the season. So there was a lot of positives to take away from him in the first month of him as a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Yeah, it's hard to beat Joe Flacco, man. I don't know what it is, but it's hard to beat Joe Flacco, especially in Indy. But next up, you got the Washington Commanders, who have basically just outshined everything we thought they were going to be. Jaden Daniels, we talked about him a lot on the prospect videos and stuff, but him to be so good so early is just so, it's so cool to watch. And he's older. He's like a Bo Nix age. He's a Michael Penix age, but it's still like you don't see rookies come in and be able to do this stuff.
4 excellent games.
Right,
games.
Exactly.
And that's what he's been. He's had an 80% completion percentage each of the last 2 weeks, putting up
so good
40 a game so far with basically Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson. That's pretty much it. He's just been lights out. Very impressed, very surprised. They're winning the NFC East right now. And, I mean, there's nothing in this next 4 that doesn't make me believe that they will be kind of essentially right where that was after 8 games, because there's 3 of the next 4 at home, probably dropping the Baltimore one. But, I mean, 6-2, 5-3, they're going to be in a very, very good spot. And like I said, they were the big bet. If you wanted to bet somebody early in the season, I was like the Commanders 10-1 to win the NFC East. They're the team to bet, not Dallas, to win this division if you're going to do a bet for the non-favorite, which was the Eagles at the time.
Who we'll talk about now. The Eagles getting a bye week in week 5, then playing Cleveland, the Giants, and Cincinnati. I think that all of those games are definitely winnable, especially for the Eagles. They are beat up a little bit. Both of their starting receivers and AJ Brown and Devontae Smith have been out. Darius Slay, I think, is out, which also hurts them, but they have a lot of talent. Saquon being on that team and everything, they have a lot of talent. They will fix this ship. Not be 2-2. This 2-2 is kind of disappointing.
Yeah, so it is disappointing in a sense from a record perspective, but it's very defensible.
Right. Oh yeah.
And we didn't have any influence on it. I haven't even looked at any power rankings on any other site to see where they are. I'm actually interested to see that once we kind of are done with this video. But I mean, they drop a fluky one to the Falcons that 99 times out of 100, according to analytics, they were going to win, and they would have been 3-0. And then last week, both Devontae Smith and AJ Brown were out. You couldn't move the ball at all. And Tampa just was playing lights out, just like they have been. So very defensible loss.
Right, for sure.
Even though it's like, why are they playing? They're not playing as well as Washington. Well, it's easy to defend them, and if they did play the head-to-head, they would be favored by about 3.5, 4.5 points. And, nobody would be surprised if they did beat Washington right now if they did play tomorrow. And that's kind of why we just kept them just above them for now.
Yeah, talent-wise, I mean, they are more talented across the whole board. Washington's defense is still bad. We can't overlook that, guys. Then next up, we got the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo has been just really good. It's hard to say that they took a step back in any way. And then, of course, they get beat by Baltimore 35-10. It's like they were killing everybody, and then boom.
Yeah, I mean, they have a strong argument to be number one on this ranking through 3 weeks.
3 weeks, yes.
And then all of a sudden on primetime football, they just really fell flat. From the start, first play for Baltimore, 87-yard touchdown for Derrick Henry, and it's like, my lines are dead.
Yeah.
So, it was a bad loss. Maybe you can throw it out, but I don't know kind of where to go from here. It's a very, very exciting game to watch with this week going on the road to Houston. They're actually a favorite on the road against Houston. I don't know who's going to win that game. It's a true pick 'em to me, but a very, very important one. And then the Giants should beat the Titans. Even though they're on the road against Seattle, they should beat the Seattle Seahawks. And
of course,
they're by far the strongest team in the AFC East right now. And, that's just kind of where it's going to be throughout most of the year, unless something really, really goes wrong.
Yep. And then next, the Texans, the team that Buffalo will be playing. I will say that this is one of the worst divisions in football, and I thought, and most people thought that it was going to be one of the best, with the Jaguars being 0-4, and then Tennessee being 1-3, but beating a Tyler Huntley Miami team. Houston's kind of riding on that right now, and they did beat Indianapolis in week 1 just by 2 points, close game. Beat the Bears in week 2, and then lose to Minnesota and just absolutely get trashed by Minnesota, and then win a close game versus Jacksonville. I don't know how good this team is yet.
Yeah, it's kind of an unknown. Basically, right where we had them at the start of the year, they're 3-1. We expected them to win 3 or 4 to start the year. It was not a great look of a loss to Minnesota, but in the grand scheme of things, non-conference game, not going to really matter from a tiebreaker perspective. And then the next 4 weeks, kind of similar to Buffalo, they're going to win 3 or 4 probably, and just kind of go forward, and they'll be 6-2 and a clear favorite to win the division. That's just kind of where we have them. The biggest thing is that they're basically playing every single important team going forward. So Buffalo, Baltimore, Kansas City, those are the games that truly matter to me. Is like,
right,
you were the dog that came out of nowhere to kind of be a surprise Final Four team. Well, now that you have expectations, how do you play against those big teams that you're fighting against to stay there and get over the hump? Because the problem with the Deshaun Watson teams, or way back when the Matt Schaub teams, they were always going to be one of the Final Four teams, but they couldn't get over the hump to be a dog on the road to upset New England or an Indy or a Chargers or what have you, to take that next step. Can they be that team? They have the talent to do so. I just need to see it.
Yep, absolutely. And then San Francisco 49ers kind of beat up. Christian McCaffrey's been out. Deebo Samuel was out. George Kittle has been out this year. Defensively, I don't know that they've had any big injuries other than their safety. Have they had any other injuries?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah.
So, with San Fran, I think they kind of weathered the storm. They were the team that were decimated by injuries throughout camp, and then also had the holdout for Trent, had the holdout for Brandon Ayuk. Obviously, those things got resolved, but Trent Williams has not played by being the most dominant left tackle in football yet. Still great, but just not what we expect. And then Brandon Ayuk has been a dud since he signed his big deal.
Right.
And that is with George Kittle and Debo missing time and Christian McCaffrey. And he has opportunities, but then Juwan Jennings is going for 175 yards and 3 scores when he's the chalky guy to play. But yeah, like they had all the injuries to worry about. Quality win against the Jets week 1. Dominated New England like they probably should have, and then a close loss that the Rams didn't lead for a single second until the final 2 seconds after they kicked that field goal to take the lead. And then against Minnesota, tough loss to Minnesota, but they're much better than we thought they'd be.
Yeah.
And they just played very, very well that week. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one thing I will say is they did lose both of the games in the NFC, and that could potentially screw up the tiebreakers.
But then they got 3 of the next 4 are home against Arizona, Seattle.
Yeah.
I don't care that it's on the road. They're going to be favored.
They're
in
better.
That game.
Yeah.
And then Kansas City at home, and then Dallas at home. So obviously, a couple of those teams at the very end of what I just mentioned, coming off byes, both Kansas City and Dallas. So that's kind of annoying when you got to back-to-back weeks play teams that are on rest. But Dallas, that's just put in ink that they're going to win that game. And then Kansas City is really the only losable game. And then all of a sudden you could be 5-3, but 6-2 optimistically. And then you're just kind of right back where we thought you'd be. And you weathered the storm exactly how you should. They're the most talented team outside of maybe Detroit, but that's very, very close. But yeah, to me, there's just a clear gap between Detroit, San Fran, and then the next best NFC team right now, the way that everybody's playing. And so they deserve to still be in the top 6 despite being 2-2, and that's just why they are.
Well, Baltimore being 2-2 is our next team at 5. They did lose their first 2 games to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders game was a 3-point game that I don't think anybody expected. But then they do beat Dallas 28-25, and then they steamrolled Buffalo, like we said earlier. Game script has been a real thing for them. When Derrick Henry's moving well, they are winning games. And 2-2.
Yeah, I mean, with them, you lose by a toe, literally week 1. And again, you lose close to Kansas City, nobody is going to fault you.
Right.
They actually caught a very bad break being the season opener game, banner on the road team on a short week kind of thing. And then the Raiders one can acknowledge that was a weird one. But 9 times out of 10 they win that game, and then all of a sudden they'd be 3-1, if not 4-0. Like nobody's faulting them for their losses, and then obviously beating Buffalo the way they did very much vaulted them up, probably about what would have been 7-8 spots if we did this ranking last week. So yeah, they're clearly one of the best teams in the AFC. They're going to be right there. Cincinnati, such a pivotal game for both teams.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Cincinnati's either going 1-4. Or Baltimore's going 2-3, and Cincinnati would be 2-3, but have the tiebreaker over them, and that would be their 3rd loss in the conference to start the season. So, very interesting game. And then the next 3, they should be favored, and I wouldn't be shocked if they, at minimum, were 5-3, but 6-2 after this next 4 game stretch.
Right, and then Tampa Bay is our 4th team. They have moved up 15 spots from 19. This is one of the weird ones.
Yeah, we're getting weird at the final slide.
I was actually going to say that was one of the only ones that I was like, it's interesting when we kind of talked about these earlier, but I was like, no, let's let it ride. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 3-1. They have, they beat the Commanders in week 1, who's been one of the best teams that we didn't expect. They beat the Lions in week 2, and then they beat the Eagles, all teams that are in their top 10. But they also lose to the Broncos by 19 points.
It's a weird one. The Broncos one, that's definitely not a great look. But they have the 3 most quality wins out of any other team, and it's not even close. I mean, dominating Washington. Now we know Washington won their next 3. They're very, very good. And they, dominated them from the start. Detroit, going on the road to Detroit, beating them. We have Detroit as the most talented team in the NFC, or one of the favorites. And they went into Detroit and got revenge on them from their season-ending loss last year.
Yeah.
And then this week, even though Philly was shorthanded, blowing them out the way they did, and how they just would not stop scoring points early in the game, and just made it seem like it wasn't going to be close. Like pivotal wins, all 3 pivotal wins, all in the NFC. And then Denver, again, weird game, but it's AFC. Not as much from a tiebreaker implication. But yeah, they look really, really good. Kind of what I said to earlier. Atlanta play twice in this stretch. New
Hmm.
Orleans as well. That'll be on the road, and then a home game against Baltimore. That I don't know if they'll be favored, but that's going to be a tough game to win. So very tough stretch this next 4 weeks. I don't really know how it'll turn out for them, but yeah, you just have to give respect to the resume that they put forward so far, and that's why they jumped all the way to 4 like they did.
Yep. And then to say, just to piggyback, there are 3 NFC games in this stretch, so those will be big games, of course, and then also 2, both against Atlanta, being the actually all 3 of them, I apologize, are going to be part of the division. Very, very interesting team to be at 4, though. Next up, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the reason they're here is because, well, first off, Rashee Rice, his injury is terrible, and I know Patrick Mahomes is kicking himself for that. That's unfortunate for sure. But they do go and beat Baltimore, good team. Atlanta, projected to win that division. Lost the Chargers, beat them by a touchdown. Even, I know the Chargers were beat up, but still. And then Cincinnati in a game that I thought Cincinnati should have won.
Yeah, so with them, this is a controversial one straight up just because they're 4-0. They started out 1, they protected, and they're undefeated. So why did they drop 2 spots? And it's purely just because of what they've lost. I mean, like Rashee Rice, there's still no word yet. It's weird, but he's out for a significant amount of time. Isaiah Pacheco, they lost for multiple months with a broken leg. Their left tackle, Suamataia, was benched. And Patrick Mahomes is playing the worst he's played in his career through 7 years.
Travis Kelce's not even a thing right now.
Finally had a sighting this past week by default because Rashee Rice was hurt early, but just they aren't looking good from an aesthetic perspective. They're finding ways to win, which is always welcome in sight. But I don't really have confidence in my Super Bowl pick of them winning it all and being the first team to win 3 straight right now based on the way they're playing. Yes, it's cool they're 4-0, but last year I actually felt better about them when they were kind of fighting their way to the 2 seed and then 1 because they were getting hot at the right time. And if they go into it and it's 12-5, but they started out 10-1, kind of similar to what Philly was last year, where they started out, undefeated like they were, and then really fell off. You didn't have confidence when they were playing on the road against Tampa that they were going to just go, and then they just got dominated. So if Kansas City isn't careful, they could be in a similar path of just they find ways to win these early games, and then later in the season, when you have to play these tough teams in short stretches and all that stuff, you could be, not entering in a spot where you want to. Obviously these next 3 games, they're very winnable games, and they could start out 7-1 or 7-0. But yeah, I just don't like what I'm seeing from them despite their record.
Right.
And obviously the injuries being significant injuries. It's not just San Fran banged up. Oh, Christian McCaffrey will be back soon, but guess what? Jordan Mason is still playing like a top 5 running back in his absence, and they're still kind of withering the storm. Whereas Kansas City is just like you're back to where it's just like an eyesore of an offense, and you're trying to overcome that. And you're like, I just don't love seeing an Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes led team winning by scoring 17 points and just feeling confident in them.
Right. Absolutely. The next team up is Detroit. They are 3-1, and they are still at the number 2 spot overall. That has a lot to do with mostly because of the fact that we just love their roster. Their roster, top to bottom, is the best in the NFL. That is not a question in my mind. They just have, every position. And honestly, we thought that they could lock down their secondary and make it better. It hasn't looked better yet, but they are very young back there. So give them some time. We'll figure that out. Beat Seattle last night, kind of just trashed them. They were better by far. Go to overtime with the Rams in week 1, lose to Tampa Bay, who we have in the top 4. So big game there. And then Arizona, they won by 7. But yeah, I think that this team is just really good overall.
Yeah, with them, they're exactly how they were last year and how they finished. They're very strong offensively and defensively, much to be desired. Being left, my only thing with them is just the Rams. They didn't put them away, and all of a sudden they found themselves down in a game they should have been winning the entire time. And then Tampa, I don't know how you lose to Tampa, even though Tampa's playing well. Like you shouldn't be losing that game. And then Arizona, just it's too close for what it should be. And then against Seattle, yeah, they put up 42, but they couldn't put Seattle away. And Seattle, controversially could have been, if that 2-point conversion was actually converted like it should have been, it's a 1-possession game and they're getting the ball back.
Right.
And it's kind of like you're not putting these teams away like you probably should be. But at the same time, you're getting the win. So they're one of the teams that they don't need the bye right now. They need to just kind of build that momentum. It'll be nice to see them come out of the bye, play Dallas after a week of rest. But again, it's not something that they needed. But Dallas will be kind of banged up without both defensive ends. Should be a win. And then Minnesota, that'll be an exciting game out of nowhere.
Right.
Especially for the division and being on the road. And then Tennessee, you should win. They're going to be at the top or not favored to be in the NFC favorites the entire year. I just want to make sure that they're, not getting in over their heads and losing opportunities that they should not be.
Right, of course. Next up, our number 1 spot, Minnesota Vikings jumping 23 total spots. It's insane, but they've just been so much better than everybody. I mean, they basically handled the Giants. They beat San Francisco, who we were really high on, by 6. Then they beat the crap out of Houston, and they were beating the crud out of Green Bay also until halfway through the third quarter. So they've just, kind of had their business and taken care of it. They're going to play the Jets in London, get a bye week, and then get to play Detroit, which is huge, coming off of the bye. And then they get to go to Los Angeles Rams. Hopefully the Rams will be healthy by then and we'll have a good game. But if not, it might be more of just this thrashing. Their defenses look so good.
Yeah, it's been just incredible to watch them. It's fun to watch them. They're a fun team to watch. Sam Darnold, shout out to him.
Good at football.
He's been excellent. He is the number 3 in QBR right now, leading the NFL. The only person with over 10 touchdowns. He's got 11 through 4 weeks. Has played incredible. Coach of the year kind of thing. I mean, we thought that they would be kind of in transition, which I didn't know when, but I thought eventually at some point that they would transition to a JJ McCarthy. But that was already that door was shut because of the season-ending injury before it even started. So Sam Darnold didn't have to look over his shoulder of like, am I playing well enough to have a job tomorrow?
Yeah.
And now he's just letting it rip. He's kind of similar to Joe Flacco. Like, no F's given. We're just going to let it ride, and he's playing well. It's finally fun to see him in a good situation. And on top of that, they're kind of getting their guys back because Jordan Addison missed time. He re-aggravated an injury, came back last week, scored 2 touchdowns. And then they're going to have a bye soon. TJ Hawkinson's coming back. I mean,
give me
TJ. It's coming together. They're playing well, and they're the darling or the Cinderella darling right now. Just like they're the team that comes out of nowhere, like you see every year. And you had to give them their respect because, yes, they probably won't be number 1 when we do this a month from now. But damn it, they're playing the best football through a month. And you just can't deny it.
Well, Justin Jefferson, of course, does help Sam Darnold a ton. But I love the idea that Hawkinson will be back for the Detroit game. That should be his first game, and that's where he originally played at. So that'll be awesome to see. It's just a fun team that I didn't expect, and I love when that kind of happens and works out that way.
Yeah, we got a close friend that's a Viking fan, so he's been smiling a lot more lately.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just good to watch. So yeah, that's our power rankings through the month of September. We appreciate you tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe. We want to know where we went right, where we went wrong, where are we crazy, where are we giving good calls out. We want to know who you've been impressed by, who you've been most disappointed by, all that good stuff. We want to know. Be following us on our socials. We've been getting more and more active. It's been a lot of fun covering the NFL so far. It's been a great start to the year, and I just can't wait for it to keep continuing.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate y'all. Go get in our Discord if you want some of our spread picks and everything, prize picks, Underdog, DraftKings, all of it. Yeah, we got it all in there. So please go check it out, and that'll be a link in our bio, and we will see y'all next time.
See y'all, guys.